not ready to talk yet, but just keep going, you know. I didn't even put on the microphone.
For the grandkid.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's what I
Wonderful.
was looking at. 2 grown daughters and 2 wonderful daughters-in-law.
And that's it. That's it. Oh yeah. More important than they can. But and yeah, sometimes I'd rather have the daughter-in-laws than the sons. You know, they're better.
Some cases, yeah.
Yeah.
And adorable granddaughters and handsome grandsons.
That's it.
How are
That's
your
it.
sons?
He's the little one is he's 2.5, almost 3, and then the girls are 7 and 4, 7 and 4, 7 and 5, something like that. So they're you know they're young toddlers, but you know 2 of them are in Tulsa, and 2 of the grandchildren are in Orlando.
Okay.
So we go between Oklahoma. You know, somebody asked me where we travel. So we go to Oklahoma and we go to Orlando. Oklahoma and Orlando. Oklahoma and Orlando. And it's
Yeah.
it's interesting. It's
That's-
wonderful.
that's-
It's a good chapter of life.
Our grandkids, of course, are growing.
Yeah.
One of them is graduating from high school.
Wow. Wow.
The second one graduating next year.
Wow.
And 2 grandsons and 3 granddaughters.
Wow. And where are they going to go to college? What's the one who's finishing high school?
I mean, basically, they're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
They could-
Yeah.
but
Somewhere where they
locally.
here and around here.
You ready?
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. People on Zoom, you are muted. Please stay muted. At the end of the talk, if you have questions, you can put it in the chat and I'll monitor the chat. People in the room, if you have a cell phone, if you can please silence it, will be greatly appreciated. And Dr. Khan is here to introduce our speaker for today.
Well, it seems when I came in, our speaker was talking to everybody here, so I think he needs not that much of an introduction. But as a host, I have to do that. And so we have today Rabbi David Kaiman. I have known him for quite a while. We're pretty good friends. And he is a rabbi at Congregation B'nai Israel. I'm sure you have seen it when driving by it. He ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York in June of 2003. And I think this is your first appointment at this.
That's right.
Yeah. And in June of 2003, an MA in Hebrew letters and concentration in religious education. Rabbi Kaiman has served as a rabbi and educator at congregations in Florida, New Jersey, Wisconsin, and Maryland. He also spent several summers as an educator at Camp Ramah, including 2 years with the Tiqwa program for special needs Jewish education at Camp Ramah in New England. Prior to entering seminary, Rabbi Kaiman spent 21 years as a corporate manager in industry where he was active as a community leader for religious and secular organizations. He's also a proud Gator. He's married, has 2 grown sons, granddaughters, and a grandson. Thank you, Rabbi.
Saeed, thank you. And I so appreciate being able to be with you today. Can you hear me okay? Good. Can you people on Zoom hear me? Good. Well, I want to tell you a story today. That's it. I'll just tell you a story because I think that's the best way to start off about a story. And it's a very local story, local to us here in Gainesville. In fact, my story starts off almost exactly 200 years ago, and not very far from where we're sitting today at Okamic. It was in Micanopy, Florida, 1822, when a Jewish man named Moses Elias Levy purchased a piece of property off of what is now known as Wakahuta Road. If any of you want to take a little drive over there, not too far from here. He purchased a piece of property to build a farming community. He envisioned a place where Jews who were living in Europe and were being persecuted in Europe and were living under difficult conditions could come to this territory. This is before Florida became a state in 1845. So this was a territory, an area that he was able to purchase land fairly inexpensively, because who wanted to live in Florida in 1822? And remember, air conditioning was not invented and mosquitoes were invented. He wanted to build a utopian community. Around those years, there were other places and other times of people who also wanted to build a utopian community. But Moses Levy, being a Jew, originally from Morocco, living in the Caribbean, knew that if he could build a refuge for Jews, that he could somehow build a way for them to escape the kind of lives they were living in Eastern Europe. And so, with financing from a wealthy Jewish family in New York City, he purchased this property and opened it as Pilgrimage Plantation, not too far from here. And he brought over about 20 or 25 Jewish families to begin a farming community that he envisioned could be a model, and that one day could serve to rescue those Jews who lived in dire circumstances in Eastern Europe. However, while the crops he brought over flourished, he was one of the first planters of sugarcane here in Florida. He brought sugarcane to Florida. While the crops flourished, his little plantation became a little bit controversial, because they also, the settlers who were there, the immigrants who came, allowed runaway slaves who had escaped the United States and he come into this territory of Florida. They allowed those runaway slaves to live there. Part of the Jewish idea of welcoming the stranger, of welcoming those who are in need, those who feel persecuted, After a few years, the plantation was burned to the ground and the residents fled. The only remnant of the plantation that survived was the lake that was next to the plantation. They had named the lake in honor of the wealthy Jewish family who had financed the plantation. The family's name, they were a German family, named the Warburgs. And in the Southern accent version, that lake is still property of the University of Florida today and is known as Lake Warburg. And many of you may have been to Lake Warburg. The plantation itself is gone, and the current owners of the land have refused any attempts that we have made to try and excavate the property because it is now farmland and they want to keep farming on it. Levy's descendants would go on to build the state of Florida into what it is now. You may know that it was his son who would become the very first senator for the state of Florida after Florida was admitted to the Union. And today, his name is memorialized with the establishment of Levy County here in Florida. Now, I want to jump ahead. 100 years ahead from 1822 to 1922. And no, when I have given this talk before, some of my younger students say, "Oh, Rabbi, do you remember 1922?" And no, I don't. I am getting older, but I don't remember it. Although I knew many people, as you did, who do remember 1922. And so even though 1922 was not that long ago, it's worthwhile remembering that this area of Gainesville was enjoying a kind of renaissance. The University of Florida had not long before been established here in Gainesville. It brought together a few institutions of higher learning. And Gainesville was gaining popularity not only as a successful farming community, but in fact, people were beginning to realize that it had value Florida had value as a tourist destination. And one of the early, those of you who've been to like the Butler Plaza area and may know that area was first developed as a what they called a tin can park for trailers for travelers who came to Florida in their tin cans, or what we would call now mobile homes or RVs. But what was the climate like in those years in the early 20s? The political climate was interesting. The United States was still recovering from the Great World War. And that had brought a huge influx of immigrants into the United States. And legislation was being passed in those years to curtail the flow of immigrants into the United States. There was a great push for America to return to its roots, for Americans to be American. And closing the doors to immigration was seen as an important step in keeping America what it was meant to be. I'll read you a quote from the New York Times, an article that was published a few years ago about those years, the early 1920s. At play were the tensions between the rural and the urban, the isolationist and the world engaged, the America of white Protestant Christianity and the multiracial America of all faiths, the America that distrusted immigrants and the America that saw itself in those immigrants. The 1920s also brought significant legislation that introduced huge tariffs as a protectionist measure for U.S. business interests. It was in those years of the early 20s that the Ku Klux Klan had a revival throughout the United States. Here in Gainesville in 1922, every member of the city council, except for the mayor, was a publicly declared member of the Ku Klux Klan. Here in Gainesville, in downtown Gainesville, a Catholic priest who had been working at the newly established University of Florida was tarred and feathered by a mob in downtown Gainesville. Monuments to the Confederacy were being erected here in Gainesville and in cities throughout the southern United States. That's 100 years ago. There was a small group of Jewish immigrants living in Gainesville, many of whom had relocated here from Atlanta following the lynching and death of Leo Frank, a Jew who was accused of rape and was lynched by a public crowd to a great anti-Semitic cause. And these Atlanta Jews sought safer communities, places where they could open their retail businesses, where they could find a way of making a living, and they could commune with one another. It was in 1924 that my congregation, Congregation B'nai Israel, was founded here in Gainesville. The motivation? To try and build a building, a religious building, that would represent the Jews of Gainesville, since these immigrants desperately wanted to be seen as legitimate and American citizens. They desperately wanted to be accepted, and they wanted to maintain their identity, and they saw many churches and religious buildings here. So they too wanted their own building, and directed the first synagogue and incorporated the first synagogue and Jewish cemetery here in Gainesville between 1922 and 1924. The cemetery, in fact, is also located just not very far from where we're sitting here at Oak-Hammock. And now let me bring you to our current day. Here we are in the year 2025, 100 years later, 200 years after Moses Levy came to this town, 100 years after the Jews first established a synagogue here in town. And here we are today, just finishing the Jewish holiday of Passover. Now, you all probably know, and I know quite a few of you who are here in the room have met me before, and others who I have met. You know that Passover is the holiday, the Jewish holiday, where we Jews recall the Exodus from Egypt. We recall that time so many years ago where the Jews felt the oppression of slavery, the oppression of hard work, the oppression of being unable to take care of one's own destiny. And in the story, our biblical story, we recall on Passover the miraculous nature of the release into the desert of some 600,000 Jews who would make their way to the land that was promised to them. But we retell the story of Passover not because it is a historical event that we want to retell, because it's recorded, it's in the Bible, it's not an event that is likely to be forgotten. When we do the Passover Seder, hidden between the words and in the message of Passover is this essential knowledge that every generation faces their own turmoil and their own oppression. Every generation will feel that they are standing on the banks of the Red Sea, looking ahead, unknowing at what and how the sea will open, how they will be rescued, and feeling that freedom is on the other side of something else. We tell that story because it's not just a story of our ancestors. It is a story of our ancestors, a story for which we're very proud of. But we tell the story because it is relevant for every generation to know that they face the oppression, turmoils, and troubles, and that there is eternal hope that they too will cross that Red Sea, that the dry land will open up. And so we observed Passover in this year, being reminded that we face our own challenges. The Jewish community in America, in the world really, is small. 0.2% of the world's population. 0.2%. Total, there are about 15 million people who identify themselves as Jews in a world population that exceeds 8 billion. Today, Judaism is diverse, both religiously and culturally. Judaism has been dedicated to the preservation of its history, but also to the values, morals, and ideas of justice that are for us the principles of leading a meaningful life. Judaism recognizes the innate dignity of every single individual, every single human being, regardless of faith or nationality or background. And in our own way, we work towards trying to live a life that allows us to celebrate our own lives and live lives of safety and dignity. How could I sum up for you the tenets of faith, of a faith that's thousands of years old and has absorbed the ideas and influences of so many cultures? How do I tell you about a faith group that is so dramatically diverse that we often teach there is no one single simple idea or concept that unifies all the Jewish world? Even theologically, you will find that Jews have a multitude of ideas about God, about belief. But I believe that what unites us are a few things. One is the idea that our lives have purpose and meaning depending on what we do in life, how we act, how we contribute to the world, how we uphold our part in the world. That, for us, has been a primary motivator. Because for us, it's not what you think about or what you believe. It's what you do that makes a difference in the world. It's how you hold yourself. To be a Jew means to see oneself as identifying either through birth or voluntary affiliation with this historic Jewish people. Interpreting that and exactly finding out what that means is complicated. For example, there are a number of Jewish denominations, just like in other faith groups. Not all Jews agree on everything, so we have a number of denominations. My denomination is called Conservative Judaism, but politically we are undoubtedly liberal. My denomination is called Conservative, but we are also in the part of Judaism that is called the Liberal Judaism. In my denomination, we see ourselves as conserving tradition, and yet we are dedicated to adapting and changing along with the world around us and allowing new insights and developments for innovation. So it's complicated. For us, Passover is not the only important Jewish holiday. Some of you know about Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. These occur in the other end of the year with Passover is in the spring. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the high holidays, occurs in the fall. And unlike Passover, that recalls a communal event that happened thousands of years ago, what we call the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, are about the individual. They're about relationships. They're about how do we repair the relationships that we have, not only with other people, but the relationship we have with God and the relationship we have to ourselves. Jewish wisdom recognized long ago that part of successful living is being able to make peace with your neighbors, being able to make peace with those who surround you, being able to come to some kind of reconciliation with those who we interface with in the world. And so those holidays are very personal holidays, also concerned with finding out how do we make peace with God, how do we make peace with ourselves, how do we forgive ourselves for things that we may have done along the path of life that are hard to remember and hard to think about. And yet, we need to let go. We need to process. We need to find ways of making amends and move forward. Passover and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the high holidays, these are on two opposite ends of the yearly calendar, and there are a host of other holidays that find their way in the middle, some of which I know you're very familiar with, like Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, which is so well known because it comes at the same time as Christmas. But in fact, in Judaism, is a relatively minor holiday. Or Purim, which is the Jewish version of Mardi Gras. You'll find in our Jewish tradition many holidays that are similar and familiar. But today, my friend, today on the Jewish calendar, just today, the day that Saeed asked me to talk, on the Jewish calendar, it is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day. And at the time you asked me, Saeed, I didn't look at the calendar. I just looked to make sure I didn't have anything else scheduled for today, and I didn't. Here in Gainesville, in the Jewish cemetery that's just down the road from here, Ralph Lowenstein, who some of you may have known, who was a former dean at the School of Journalism, he had come to me some years ago and he said, Rabbi, I want to build a Gainesville Holocaust memorial. But I don't want you to give me money for it. I want to raise money from the community. And I want to be able to do it by making a limit of $18. 18, the number 18 in Judaism signifies the word high or life. I want to make a limit of $18, maximum donation. And I want to see if I can raise enough money for this memorial. So in the center of the Jewish cemetery, not far from here, you'll find a large stone, a Holocaust memorial. And on the top of that stone, Ralph depicted a Jewish star, a Magen David, where 1/4 of it is missing. 1/4 of the star has just not been finished. It represents the total Jewish population at the time of World War II, and the fact, the recognition that 1/4 of the Jewish population was murdered and exterminated in the course of those years of the Nazi regime. 1/4 of all Jews, 1 out of every 4 of every Jew. What if we were to compare that, let's say, to the population of the United States? What if 1/4 of the American population were decimated over a course of some years? That would be 85 million Americans. The cost of that event to Jews and Judaism and to future Jewish population is unimaginable. And I wish I could stand here today and tell you that we live in a very different world. I wish I could tell you that we don't live in the world that Moses Levy lived in 1822, where his idea of a utopian refuge was burned to the ground by those who thought and felt that he was not in the economic interests of slaveholders. I wish I could tell you that in 1922, those years of turmoil and of legislation that blocked millions of Jews and others from coming into the United States under strong immigration legislation, strong financial controls that would eventually lead, of course, to the Depression. I wish I could tell you that I didn't have fears today. I wish I could tell you that today we live in a world where everything is okay. But every day, 7 days a week, I come to the synagogue where I have to face the armed guards who we have posted at the synagogue 7 days a week to ensure our safety. And we've needed those guards. It has been a tax on the Jewish community, a tax of protecting ourselves that other religious communities haven't felt. Yet we had to tighten our infrastructure, bulletproof our windows, and provide a haven so that parents could feel safe to bring their children for religious worship. What keeps me going? What keeps me personally serving our Jewish community? It is still the dedication to the values of a tradition that prays that there will one day be a day when safety and security can be felt for all. We pray for a day when the oppressed are truly free. All the oppressed are free. We pray for a day when the downtrodden are lifted up, when religious bigotry from the right and the left and in between will no longer fester, when brothers and sisters can live together in peace, recognizing that we can accomplish more together. This is one of the things that Saeed and I have worked on for more than 2 decades now, bringing our religious communities together to say we can do more together than we can apart. We can accomplish more when we recognize our goals are the same than thinking that our goals are different. That's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me praying that my grandchildren can one day grow up in a world where they can practice and be proud of who they are, where they come from, what they have inherited, not only from the tradition of their people, the Jewish people, but their tradition of an America where we promise a land of freedom, a land of fairness, a land where we can be who we are without pressure or intimidation. That's my prayer. That's my hope. And now I'm happy to pause and answer questions from you if you have any questions, or if I can be able to. Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Please raise your hand.
Rabbi, do we have any descendants of the originators of the 1922 formation of B'nai Israel still living in Gainesville?
No, we don't. Although we are in touch with, so it's very interesting. Bud comes to the synagogue a lot, and if you notice in the lobby of the synagogue, Bud, there is what looks like a tombstone, but it is in fact a plaque that lists the members of the original founding families of the congregation. And we did track down those families when we were planning our 100th anniversary. There are some that are living in Tampa, but that's the closest. Other families, we could find no descendants at all, and their families just are no longer around, the names at least. But no, we don't have any of the original families here, but we do have many longtime members who have been here a long time.
There's a question, how do you define anti-Semitism? It is being used as a justification for many questionable executive orders. Question there.
Yeah. Good question. So anti-Semitism is not so easy to define. But like many things, we know it when we see it. And I would define anti-Semitism as the disdain and hate for Jews and Judaism, which is something very different from political opposition to any political state like in Israel. And so we do find a kind of complicated relationship between anti-Semitism and criticism of the state of Israel. But I think for me, anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jews, plain and simple.
Thank you, Rabbi, for the excellent presentation. I was wondering if you could explain the differences between the various types of Jewish practice, such as Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Chabad, and what separates the different factions?
I would rather talk about, I'll give you the answer, but I would rather talk about what unites us, and that's why I didn't talk about what divides us. And the reason I'd rather talk about what unites us is because we are living in a world where people really like to talk about what separates people from one another? What's the difference between Republicans and Democrats? What's the difference between being in the right and the left? And I hope that one day we can return to a world where we don't talk about what separates us and we talk about what unites us. But I'll answer your question. The differences in denominations began as Jews began to struggle with what does it mean to live in a modern open world. For many, many centuries, Jews had little choice. They lived in closed communities. But once Jews began to entered into general society around, with the French Revolution and American Revolution, and as Jews were allowed to become citizens and become part of the general population, they began to grapple with modernity and grapple with how do we fit in the world that we live in today. The denominations of Judaism, which are still the three main, is Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, are different in how they approach the tradition, how they understand what it means to be part of traditional Judaism. Each of them has a different way of being able to interpret the tradition and to say, this is how we express ourselves. And today, this is mostly found in how these different denominations worship and approach Jewish ritual and Jewish law. That's what divides the denominations one from another. Other smaller denominations like Chabad or Reconstructionist Judaism or Renewal Judaism or Humanistic Judaism also have their own ways of thinking about and of understanding who they are, where they come from, and how they relate to this idea of what it means to be a Jew. Each of these denominations have different structures, different ideas of what a rabbi is and does. But I will let you know that as a rabbi, I get along perfectly well with all the rabbis of all the denominations. I think our world is better off when we have many channels to choose from on the television. I know there are some who say, I just want one channel. I don't want anything else but what's on one channel. But I like the idea of diversity. I like the idea of discussion and of challenging. I think it makes us stronger. So let's concentrate on what connects us. And it's this historical perspective.
Rabbi, could you explain the structure? We all know about Catholicism and the Pope that leads that. And we know even in many of the Protestant denominations, there will be some sort of a assembly periodically in communication. Could you say something about how that operates in Judaism?
I will say that we were, of course, saddened to hear about the death of the Pope recently, and so it brought to the forefront, the fact that at least in Catholicism they have this strong organizational structure. We do not have a centralized structure in Judaism at all. Every synagogue is independent. We may join together with other synagogues in federations or in associations. But there is no chief rabbi. In Israel, there are, it's very interesting. Israel does have a chief rabbi. However, there are two of them, which is typical. I mean, the two chief rabbis. And do they agree on everything? They don't agree on almost anything. It is the nature of our Jewish tradition that we are not centralized at all. Congregations organize themselves as lay-led, lay-owned, and hire their own clergy who are produced by seminaries and institutions of higher learning. In general, in most of the denominations, the degree, the rabbinic degree, is equivalent to a PhD or a postdoc degree. I was in seminary for 6 years after I finished my second master's degree. So it's a long educational process, but there is no chief rabbi. And so the voices you hear that represent Judaism are multivocal. Sometimes you'll hear somebody say, I'm going to speak for the Jews. There is no speaker for the Jews. There are hundreds of speakers for the Jews. And that diversity, as I said, that diversity I think is a strength. I have a boss, but he's way up there. David Hill. Yeah.
Hi, this is the first time I've heard that people came from Atlanta. I always thought that it was the temple was started because we had Jewish faculty, such as Dean Weil.
Mm-hmm.
Dean Weil came in 1921
Mm-hmm.
and didn't become dean till 1937. But
Mm-hmm.
I know there's other Jewish faculty, and that was what I thought caused the temple or synagogue to be created in downtown. And I also wonder, is the building still there?
Building is not there. None of the original members of that first board of directors were faculty at UF, which I actually find interesting. Yes, Dean Weil was a faculty member and an early member of the synagogue. The synagogue was already in existence. But in looking, as Bud asked me about the original families, we located not long ago not only every single home, the address of every homeowner who lived, who was on that founding board of directors, who founded that corporation. We found all of their businesses, all of their business contacts. And it began to become clear to me as we were doing this research, that all of these original people who started B'nai Israel, they were all immigrants. They all had come to the United States within a number of years. They were all retail merchants. And they were all connected to manufacturers in New York and in Atlanta and other places. And when we found out that the Jewish population of Atlanta in around 1915 to 17, after the Leo Frank lynching, declined by about 50%. The question was asked, where did they go? And then it occurred to me, I was born in Pensacola, Florida, so my family goes back 3 generations here in Florida. And I began to research not only my family, but other families. Where did they go after they left Atlanta? They went someplace. And the Jews largely went to places where they could open up businesses where they could use their retail connections to finance those businesses. Later on, the university would bring in Jewish professors, and they would help build the community.
Could you explain Kabbalah and whether you think there's any merit to it?
Sure. It's like explaining, I don't know, let me also explain physics to you on one foot, you know, I mean, Kabbalah, which means received tradition. Kabbalah is what is sometimes referred to as the Jewish mystical tradition. And Kabbalah is one of those facets of Judaism that's interesting because it is a combination of philosophies and approaches to life and to figuring out the world that was received into Judaism and was given a kind of Jewish gloss over it. Kabbalah its own claim is to come, that it came from ancient Spain and, you know, had ancient roots. We're not so certain really about that. But it is a philosophy of life. It is a philosophy of living that came to be a part of Judaism. As I mentioned in my talk, Judaism is a very old tradition. And you'll find within an old tradition lots of strains and teachings and ideas that came from all sorts of places and had much influence. Kabbalah had a great deal of influence on the development of Jewish liturgy and prayers that we have today. But it is only one part, one section of one facet of the multifaceted jewel that makes up Judaism. What is unfortunate is that some have removed that one facet and turned it into a kind of pop culture idea and have brought into it New Age ideas, this kind of New Age religion that is divorced really from that old traditional Judaism, and in my opinion loses some of the flavor and meaning of what Kabbalah could have for it. So it's a facet of Judaism. It's a way of thinking about life, similar to how you might think of other kind of political or religious philosophies that have spun out of other faiths.
Rabbi, thank you for an incredibly inspiring talk. I'm so impressed and pleased. I don't think any of us in this room missed the implication of your telling the story of the 1920s, because not.
I just tell the story. What you make of it is up to you.
Well, what we make of it is that there's an incredible emergence of history repeating itself under the incredibly incompetent and inhumane, all capital I's administration that we are experiencing right now. So my question is, you're speaking about Jewish leadership. What can Jewish leadership do today so that it really does never again happen? Because we are going down that road, and I fear for us and for all Jews and for all Americans, and I fear for the Europeans, and I fear for this movement, and it's got to be stopped.
So let me, this ties into the question that I was asked about Jewish organization, and let me just remind you that there is a great deal of diversity within the Jewish world as well. So while you may have inferred, all the time, I give a lot of talks. I mean, I'm a rabbi, so it's what I do for a living. And people always are sort of making their own assumptions. But let me remind you, there's a great deal of diversity in the Jewish world, diversity that supports the current administration and is supportive of the world we're living in. And there are voices that are not supportive. I wish there was a central authority and I was the head of it, but I'm not. Someone just wrote me the other day and said, "Are you running for the position of Pope?" No, I'm not. There's not a single voice. What I think is that I will continue, and other rabbis like myself will continue to talk about the promise of freedom, the power of diversity, the strength of a world where oppression is no longer tolerated. We'll continue to talk about those values that I believe are so important. And I can only hope that just as in other times and other places, we saw the miraculous emergence of kinder and gentler worlds that dedicated themselves to abolishing slavery, to finding ways of bringing civil rights into a world that resisted, that accomplished other great scientific feats and accomplishments using the tools that I believe are God-given tools of science and research and the power of rigorous academic study, and letting the power of freedom really bring a better life to the world. I believe that if we keep talking about those values, keep making those values at the forefront of who we are, that eventually we will again find ourselves seeing a better world. Perhaps it is just a pendulum. Perhaps the pendulum has to swing one way. I'm going to not avoid using left and right. Has to swing one way so that it can later on swing another way. Maybe that's just the way of the world. But let's still stand up strong for who we are, what we believe, and what we can accomplish together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.